This past weekend, my wife and I went and rented a cabin up in the woods with some friends. It was a super chill weekend. We just kind of hung out, played games, we had a really good time. I don't remember exactly how it came up, but at one point, one of the wives of the couples that was there with us mentioned Dave Ramsey. Without even thinking, I quickly said, I can't stand that guy.
Oh, we're all gonna die!
I probably should have been a little bit more careful about what I said because the reaction on her face kind of surprised me a little bit. So I had to go on and explain to her that no, I don't hate Dave Ramsey, but I do disagree with a lot of the principles that he teaches. I figured that this would make a really good financial video, and so I'm going to share with you guys the same information that I shared with her. How's it going, guys? I'm Bryce with SaneSense.com, where we talk about everything from personal finance to real estate investing. We try and put out new videos each and every week, so if you like what you see, go ahead and hit that subscribe button, and as always, be sure to hit that like button as well. The first thing that I had to explain to her is that credit cards are not evil.
You have open credit cards that you ran up to high balances, and you pay them off, and you're wondering if you should keep them. Sounds like a dumb question. Of course you shouldn't keep them.
Plain and simple, I don't use a debit card, period. I use a credit card for every single purchase that I make. I think the only exception to this is if I have to go to the bank and pull out cash out of the ATM. And sometimes even then, I can just walk in and talk to the teller and have them pull cash out for me, so I don't even have to use my debit card. If I could, I would even pay my mortgage with my credit card. I know that there are services out there where you can pay a small fee and then they'll send your lender a check and do it that way, but with the fees involved, I paid my mortgage with cash, but literally everything else I put on a credit card. Now, there are two main reasons why I do this, and the first being security. I've heard awful horror stories about people who lose their debit card and then their entire checking account gets wiped out. Sure, you can submit a police report and they can go through and do an investigation, and maybe a couple weeks down the road you might get your funds back. Maybe the bank will reimburse you after an investigation. But in the meantime, you could be left completely without any cash whatsoever. Plain and simple, credit cards are just safer. If I have a fraudulent charge on my card, all I do is I call up the bank, say, hey, I didn't make this charge. They'll cancel my card, issue me a new one, and then they'll wipe out the fee. That easy. I'm not left without funds. It's really fast and it's so simple.
And of course, you're done with credit cards. You're done with credit card. I don't have a credit card. You don't have a credit card? I don't have a credit card. You don't have a credit card? I don't have a credit card.
The second reason that I use a credit card for everything, and probably one of the most frequently talked about points for using credit cards, is just that. You get credit card points. You earn points on things that you're already buying anyway. Now, of course, this is assuming that you have really good self-control. If you're going to take a credit card and just keep swiping it and racking up this balance, then yeah, it doesn't do any good for you. But if you keep your spending under control, you pay off your credit card each and every month, then why would you not want to get the points?
And I put up with the same stuff everybody else puts up with out there. My debit cards work just fine, thank you very much, and do everything a credit card will do except put you in debt.
You can redeem that for free travel, free hotels, free cars, free food, or even just cash back if that's what you're into. I absolutely love leveraging sign-up bonuses with new credit cards. This credit card, for example, is my Capital One Saver card. Now, my wife and I, we really like to go out to eat, and so that's why we love this card so much. They give us 4% cash back on any of the restaurants or entertainment that we purchase. That's money that we were already going to spend anyway, so why not leverage that offer and get some money back? I think this particular credit card had an initial sign-up bonus that said if you spend $3,000 in the first 3 months, that I think they give $500 cash back. Over the course of 3 months, just as we buy groceries and gas and pay bills, you name it, we're already going to spend the $3,000. So we leverage that and get the $500 bonus. There are tons of ways to strategically use credit cards for specific categories. Up on the screen, you'll see a quick chart that I threw together. This is an example strategy, and we're going to take two individuals, Mark and Ashley, who spend the same amount of money in a given year. The only difference is that Ashley spends her money strategically, but Mark buys everything with one credit card. So Mark, for example, he has one credit card that earns 1 point for every dollar spent. Now, Ashley, on the other hand, she has 3 credit cards. Credit card A earns 5 points for every dollar spent on gas and 1 point for everything else. She has a second credit card B, that earns 3 points for every dollar spent on groceries, and then 1 point for every dollar spent on everything else. And a third credit card where she gets 3 points for every dollar spent on travel or restaurants, and then again 1 point for anything after that. Over the course of 1 year, Mark and Ashley both spend $17,000 on gas, groceries, travel, restaurants, and a few miscellaneous items. At the end of that year, Mark has 17,000 points compared to Ashley, who has earned 41,000 points. Ashley earns almost 2.5 times the number of points that Mark has earned because she leveraged multiple credit cards with different bonuses, even though they spent the exact same amount of money. Now, plain and simple, I just don't understand why Dave is so against this. Yes, I realize that he deals with a lot of financially illiterate people who just rack up money like crazy. But see, we're not worried about that. We're worried about people who are financially responsible. Why would you not want to rack up the bonuses if you can keep your credit card limits in check? In addition to the sign-up bonuses that often accompany credit cards, there's also lots of other perks that you can get as well. For example, sometimes credit cards with airlines will offer free lounge access. Sometimes they'll offer free checked bags. So say for example, you have a family of 4 who are flying across the country. That can add up to $200 or more each way. If you can save $400 per trip just for having a credit card that you would use for everyday purchases anyway, it's really a no-brainer. Obviously, I'm really passionate about this, so I'll move on to the next point. But I just disagree with Dave on this. I'm sorry. It just doesn't make sense to me to pass up on all of these bonuses and rewards if you're responsible with your money.
And you close all the credit card accounts. All of them. Every one of them.
Another way that I disagree with Dave is the fact that he asks people to hold off on retirement savings while you're paying off debt.
But my company offers 10% 401k.
No, you don't need to be in a 401k right now. You got debt coming out your ears. And
yeah, I should be done hopefully by August, but I was just wondering, since they match 10%, but you don't suggest doing that.
You see, compound interest is a beautiful thing, especially if you're young. Time is one thing that a lot of us have on our side. I'm guessing that you're already familiar with Dave's baby steps. He has 7 baby steps where he talks about different things that you should do at different stages of your life. The first baby step is to save up an emergency fund of $1,000. Step number 2 is to pay off all of your debt excluding the house. Step number 3 is to build up an emergency fund of 3 to 6 months of your monthly expenses. Now, during the first 3 of his 7 baby steps, he tells people to completely stop putting money into retirement funds. Lucky for me, I'm not one of those people that came out of school with $100,000 in debt. But imagine you're just coming out of medical school and you have $250,000 in student loans. If you completely hold off retirement savings until that $250,000 is knocked out, you're not going to be able to begin saving for retirement until you're in your mid-40s. Up on the screen is the potential amount that you could have in your 401k, assuming that you start saving for retirement at age 20, making $60,000 per year. Now, over the course of 45 years, that amounts to $2.3 million. On the screen is that same chart, assuming that you start saving for retirement at age 30. At the end of 35 years, you'll have a total of $1.1 million. The difference between starting early and starting 10 years later is the difference of $1.2 million over the course of a working lifetime. Look, Dave, I'm sorry, but this just doesn't make sense to me. By waiting to put money in retirement, you're missing out on a ton of money. I am 100% for paying off debt. That makes sense to me. I understand that. But if you're not at least contributing to your 401k enough to get your employer match, that's free money that you're missing out on. I mean, that's stupid. This is why I love compound interest so much. It does the work for you. It starts small, but towards the end of its lifetime, that scale just grows exponentially. Dave talks a lot about how it's very possible to live without a credit score. Now, I'll hand it to Dave. It is possible to live without a FICO score, but it's a lot more difficult than you think.
But here's how stupid our culture is. I can wander over here to the local apartment complex with some little 27-year-old apartment manager who reports to somebody. I live in Nashville, and they report to somebody in New York or Atlanta. And I'd fill out an application to rent an apartment. And because I don't have a FICO score, their thought train is so backward and stupid, they won't rent me an apartment.
If you've watched any of the videos on my channel thus far, you know how I feel about real estate. I love real estate, but it would not be possible to be where we're at right now with our rental properties if we didn't have leverage and we didn't have a FICO score. Dave always talks about how you don't need a credit score to rent a car, or you don't need a credit score to rent an apartment. But coming from the perspective of a landlord, I would have a really tough time renting to somebody who didn't have a credit score. It's definitely better to have no credit score versus having a bad credit score, but as a landlord, I would instantly take a tenant who has decent credit over somebody who has no credit whatsoever. Knowing that my tenant doesn't have a credit score would just make me feel uneasy, because I would have no idea of knowing how they are with their money and how they manage it, and whether or not I'm gonna get a rent check at the end of the month. When I was 19 years old, I served a 2-year religious mission in Albuquerque, New Mexico. The church that I was affiliated with, they really pride themselves on having no debt. At one point while I was serving, we had to go out and find a new apartment. The church would help cover housing and also a couple living expenses. As such, the apartment would be under the church's name. At one point, the lease ended on the apartment that we were staying in. The landlord was trying to sell the building, and so he wasn't really interested in re-upping our lease. So we had to go and find a new apartment. Every time we would get close to finding an apartment, we would always strike out because they required a previous credit score, and the church that I was with didn't have any. So even though the church was completely financially sound and had plenty of money to pay for the rent every month, very few people would even consider looking at us. Ultimately, we found one place who was willing to rent to us, but ultimately they required all of these bank statements, and we had to show proof of the assets that the church had so that they could, cover the amount, and it ended up to be this huge ordeal that it really didn't need to be. Eventually it all worked out, but it was really frustrating and a huge waste of time. In our day and age, just having a credit score is practically a way of life. So yes, Dave isn't technically wrong on this one. It is possible to make do without a credit score, but do yourself a favor, just be responsible with credit, and it'll make your life so much easier. The last way that I disagree with Dave is the fact that he always claims that you can make 12% returns in the stock market.
He says, Dave, on the show you said that the stock market has averaged around 12% a year. Can you tell me where you got that number from? Sure, S&P 500, the top 500 companies on there in terms of size. If you look at the average of the Standard & Poor and the estimates of what it would have been had those particular companies been in existence since the stock market's inception, you'll see an 11.5 to a 12% rate of return, average annual. Now that's average annual. There's different ways to calculate the math on it, but that's the number that we use and the number that we're quoting all the time when we're talking about 12%. And people get all torqued out and upset about this stuff, but that's what it's done.
It seems that Dave bases all of his information off of the 20-year span between 1980 and 2000. During that 20-year period, the stock market did have really good returns. But even then, saying 12% is a little bit ambitious. Between 1980 and 2000, when you actually account for inflation, the stock market really returned about 9.5%. That's still really good. I'm not complaining about the fact that there was only 9%, but 9% is a big difference from 12. If you look at the 15-year period of time immediately preceding 1980, so from 1965 to 1980, the stock market averaged -4% over the course of that time period. -4%. It's really easy to say that the stock market returns 12% when you pick one of the best time periods in the history of the stock market. Right now, if I were to tell you that the stock market averages, 17%, you wouldn't believe me. If you look at the last 10 years, that's what the stock market has returned. We are currently in the biggest bull market run that the history of the stock market has ever seen. But if you were to look at the average annualized return for the S&P 500 since its inception in 1923, realistically, we're getting about 8% returns. Right now, the baby boomer generation is beginning to retire, and people are beginning to take more and more of their money and move it to less risky investments. 12% returns would be great, but I think Dave's being just a little bit too optimistic. I think a lot of people following Dave's advice are going to be a little bit surprised come retirement time when they come up short because they were expecting 12% returns. Now, look, I don't mean to come off as a complete hater of Dave Ramsey and the principles that he teaches. In fact, I think Dave Ramsey has done more for people's finances than 90% of all the personal finance bloggers out there. Dave does a really good job at appealing to the masses and helping people get motivated to get out of debt. One thing I really admire about him is his my way or the highway attitude. If you watch some of his videos online, he really just doesn't put up with people's crap, and I really like that. However, I think once you get past Dave's baby step number 2, a lot of his advice just begins to fall apart. I 100% believe that you need to get out of debt, and I preach about that frequently. But once you get your finances in order, debt is actually an incredible tool. It allows you to leverage your money and do 10 times the amount that you could do on your own. I personally feel that Dave's investment advice just leaves a lot to be desired. If you want to work at your job for 45 years, stash money away in your 401k, and then retire when you're 67, that's fine, and that's exactly what Dave preaches. But for me personally, that's just not the route that I want to take. I want to be financially free and not have to slave away at a desk job until I'm too old to enjoy my money. That is it for this video, guys. Thanks so much for watching. As always, be sure to hit that subscribe button down below, and of course, hit that like button for me if you haven't done so already. I'll see you next week.